Well, it's great to be here tonight. And for those of you in the audience, hello. For those of you in the ether, hello. Tonight's topic is the archaeology of Cape Cod National Seashore. So I'm pretty much a strict interpretation of that title. I'm talking about the archaeology within the boundaries of Cape Cod National Seashore. And I'm talking about the archaeology. I'm not going to talk much about historic buildings, obscure cemeteries. That's kind of, I love talking about that, but that's a different thing. I think we're all here tonight or on Zoom because we all have something in common, and that is a kinship with the past. We all are curious, we're super interested. We want to know about the past, and everyone has their niche. Some people love to study the distant past, thousands of years ago, even millions of years ago for anthropologists. Some people have a niche like myself. I'm into like Abraham Lincoln and that whole time period. And I'd love to go back and meet Mr. Lincoln or be a fly on the wall during those big events that he was involved with. And I know all of you are hooked. So I don't have to do a sell job. Some of you I know collect antiques. That's how you connect. Some of you are genealogists and into family history. That's how you connect. Some of you watch the History Channel and you're in your PJs with a bag of Cheetos on the couch. I know some of you. Some of you just get history books and read. And some of you, like a gentleman I just spoke with a little while ago, they walk the history. They go out and they love going to places that have history, historic sites. I love going to places where history happened. So you're all hooked. I know you are. So it's a no lose tonight. I'm not nervous. Some people even make it a profession. Historical architect, historical landscape architect, curator, public speaker, educator at historic sites. Public history is what that profession is called. Historian, archaeologist. So some people make it their living because they're hooked too. So tonight I'm talking to the choir and I'm going to try to go through some of what I feel as though the most interesting things about the archaeology of the National Seashore. But there's a problem, and we know there's a problem. Anyone who loves history knows the problem is that history is elusive. We think we got it. We've read every book about whatever the subject is. We've been to the site. We need to know more. When I did go to Ford's Theater, like a pilgrimage, right? Lincoln. And in the lobby, there's a stack of books that goes about 60 feet tall. It's a really high skylight. And it's every book ever written about Lincoln. And so if someone sat there and read it all, could they go back in time and they totally understand Lincoln? I doubt it. So history is elusive. Even the archaeology on Cape Cod is elusive. The soil here and throughout much of the Northeast is highly acidic soil. So archaeology plays the mean trick of disintegrating stuff that's organic. So leather, anything that, stone survives, ceramic survives, some shellmen survive, but the soil's harsh. And I guess for some archaeologists going to the Southwest, everything's dry, not acidic, so stuff really gets preserved better. And then on Cape Cod was deforested for the most part in the 1800s, and then plowed incessantly, at least parts of it. So another cruel joke for archaeologists is they think they've got the picture, they think they've got the artifact, but there's so much going against us, the acidic soil and the plow zones and all that. So I brought with me the puzzle. It's only 48 pieces. That's my kind of puzzle. And it is a very big picture of the monarch butterflies. So I try to use the puzzle analogy because for whatever favorite part of history you have, you're hoping that your little box has all the pieces. But guess what? No story has all the pieces. Even say you're studying Harry Truman, pretty recent history. Do you think all the pieces about Harry Truman that can give you a complete picture of Harry Truman exist? How many pieces to the puzzle of Harry Truman exist today? We have his books, photographs, diaries, letters, all kinds of historian written books. So I bet there's 46 pieces to the complete story of Harry Truman. 40. What about 1620, for those of you into pilgrims? The moment the pilgrims set foot on Cape Cod, they're interacting or trying to interact with the native peoples. How many pieces of the puzzle of that moment in time, 1620, exist for those of you who really want to know what happened and what it was like? Are there 5 pieces out of a 48-piece puzzle? Are there 30 pieces? A show of hands for those in person here. How many people think that the complete story of 1620, there's less than 10 pieces left? Okay, so you get the gist. What about 10,000 years ago? The first Paleo Indians living on Cape Cod, really cold climate, the ice sheets retreating. Out of a 48-piece complete picture of 10,000 years ago, how many pieces exist today to help tell that story? Yes, Dan? 3. Sold to the back. All right. So I like to use the puzzle analogy because how do you get pieces to the puzzle? Historic photographs. And Cape Cod National Seashore has thousands of historic photographs. But those only go back into the 1800s. We can go to art historians and paintings. Those are pieces to some puzzles. We want to know what George Washington looked like. There's no photos, but there's some really good paintings. Archaeology provides clues, pieces to the past. Historic architects love old buildings because the fabric of that building can help tell the story. And those are pieces to a puzzle. So people love going to Mount Vernon, the Penniman House in Eastham. So we're in a puzzle. We are all passionate about the past. I have, before we start with some images and specifics about Cape Cod National Seashore, I have 3 personal observations about archaeology. The first one is that archaeologists are fun, passionate people who aren't afraid to get dirty, work really hard. And out of all the disciplines of history, historians, curators, architectural historians, they're the most likely discipline or profession to say the word cool. So that's my first. And tonight I'd be remiss not to mention a couple people's names that are close to me or have a connection to me. Our park archaeologist for many years, who passed away a couple of years ago, Frederica Dimmick, also known as Freddie. I had the great privilege of working with her, and she was our park archaeologist for a number of years, and we miss her dearly. So this is dedicated to her. Also, Fred Dunford, who wrote a great book back in the 90s, I think, Secrets in the Sand, The Archaeology of Cape Cod. It's a great, it's better spoken than what I'm doing tonight, really describing the people of the past on Cape Cod. And a couple of other names that I'll mention again, but Frank McManamon, who did the whole archaeological survey of the National Seashore in the 70s and 80s. And long before the National Seashore was created, there was Ross Moffat. He's the father of the early Cape Cod archaeology program. and we'll talk a little bit about him. So that's my first personal observation. Archaeologists are fun, passionate people. Secondly, archaeology is not for everyone. So we're into the past. Maybe we want to see artifacts, but to be an archaeologist, it's not for everyone. And I speak from experience. I'm a failed archaeologist. As a history major at Providence College, I did a work study in the archaeology lab at Brown University. And my job was, oh boy, there was a big tank full of cold water swirling around. And I had 300 bags of soil. For those of you who do this, you know what I'm talking about. And then you put the soil one bag at a time onto these screens and you wash all the dirt away and you come up with the little stuff that's left. So I did that for a semester. Boy, that was tough. There was no heat in the lab, the cold water swirling. I'm collecting all these great trade beads and pollen and seeds. And I was like, I'm not doing flotation, no. I also, the following semester, worked in the lab at the Rhode Island Historic Preservation Office. My job was to take the ceramics that had been recovered from an archaeological site and try to reconstruct them with glue. And they quickly learned that's not my thing. And then even at William and Mary, I spent a couple of months working for the state of Virginia before in between jobs after school. And I was working in this well 20 feet deep in Tidewater, Virginia in June, and man, it was hot and sweaty. And I learned that archaeology is not for everyone. However, as an historian, we gobble up the reports that archaeologists create, and in particular, the summaries. So archaeologists out there, keep writing those great summaries because historians read them. Okay. My third observation about archaeology is that it's evolving and the involvement in it is growing. Where I sit in my perch at the National Seashore, I work with archaeologists almost every day, either regional office archaeologists from the Park Service or contract archaeologists from a number of private firms, and also tribal historic preservation officers from the Mashpee and Wampanoag tribes of Gay-Hedequina. So I'm around archaeologists all the time, and they're always telling me about new technology, the ground penetrating radar, and the involvement with Native Indigenous peoples in the archaeological process is really becoming a trend, an important trend. So archaeology is evolving and the involvement is growing. So those are my three observations before we get started with the images. Archaeologists are fun, passionate people. Archaeology is not for everyone, and archaeology is evolving and involvement is growing. So where does Cape Cod National Seashore fit into this? So just today, we had an archaeological firm go out and test at a property near Nauset Lake in Eastham, because the park is putting in a new septic system for the employees that live in this house. I also talked with the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, David Whedon today from the Mashpee tribe, because we are now in the process of being able to pay tribal monitors. These are cultural resource specialists from the tribe to come along on some of these archaeological projects. And just last week, we reviewed another emergency project because there's a new right-of-way that needs to be cut down a road that's been wooded for years and years, but the residents on Cliff Road in Wellfleet need a new way to get to their cottage because their road is eroded away. So I'm in the midst of all this as an historian, and it's extremely interesting. So at the National Seashore, there are three focus areas that I work with. The first thing is we try to protect the archaeology sites that we have. We have 230 known archaeological sites in the National Seashore. So protection includes stopping any looting from happening. We have 44,000 total acres in the park and just a handful of law enforcement rangers. And we also need to assess the condition of those sites every year, at least some of them every year, to see if rodents are burrowing in the sites, if pedestrians are creating erosion in those sites. So part of my job is to make sure that those sites are protected. The second part of my job with archaeology is anytime the federal government at the National Seashore is going to dig anything with a shovel or a backhoe, I review the project to make sure that the fence going in, the septic being replaced, the visitor center addition happening, or whatever else it is. And we look at about 100 projects a year. I am there standing in the way between the National Park Service doing something wrong and destroying archaeological sites. The third focus that I have is new academic research. This is the fun part. We've done a lot of archaeology already at the National Seashore, but there are academic institutions that are really interested in some of our sites. And we'll be talking a little bit about UMass Boston, the Fisk Center, doing work at Great Island, University of Michigan's recent work at the Doane Homestead site in Eastham, and other things. So those are some of my focus areas. How are we doing? How's everyone out in the ether? Hi. You're missing it here. It's good. This is a good group. Okay. So let's talk about, let's go to the slide. Yes. We're going to go to, I call them slides. Yeah. Okay, cool. It all working there? Okay, so that's me, Bill Burke. This really doesn't have anything to do with archaeology, but it's a small collection of images that I received from a family from New Jersey who would visit Cape Cod long before it became a big tourist area, especially the outer beach, Wellfleet Churro. And they used to come to Cahoon Hollow, and the family and the kids would come up. They'd get a couple ducks down at the duck farm in East Orleans, and they'd hang out on the bluff all summer. And when they got from New Jersey, they'd pay off the Coast Guardsmen from the Coast Guard station who had that tractor on the left there. And they gave them a few cartons of cigarettes or whatever. And the Coast Guardsmen, hush hush, would just tow the little family vehicle and all their camping gear up to the top of the hill. I'm trying to paint a picture of mid 20th century Cape Cod, outer Cape Cod. Not much going on. Land was cheap, $800 for a half an acre. Boy, does that make you cry if you didn't buy. So land was cheap. And clearly, though, on the horizon was the baby boomers, the interstate highways, and development. Development was coming. So I'm trying to paint the picture that the archaeology of Cape Cod is pretty well preserved on the outer Cape to some extent, because there wasn't much of the development that was showing up in a lot of other coastal areas. So in 1961, after 5 or 6 years of public debate, the National Seashore was created. John F. Kennedy, who had been a senator, who introduced one of the earlier proposals for the National Seashore, was by then president of the United States, and his presence as president probably pushed the thing along even faster. And so we had, voila, 44,000 acres of a national park unit. Pictured in the dark orange would be the lands of Cape Cod National Seashore, stretching from Provincetown off the top left there and going 45 miles or so outer beach down to Chatham, with some areas of the park taking up quite a bit of land, especially in Provincetown and Truro. There were 3,700 land transactions made by the Park Service to create a patchwork quilt of a national seashore. Some of the land transactions were big. The Province Land State Reservation was 3,200 acres. That was one transaction given to us by the state, but there were little 1/10 of an acre transactions as well. This is going to affect the archaeology resources of Cape Cod National Seashore because most of the acreage was not built on. However, there's about 660 houses within the National Seashore that were here before the National Seashore. So about 4% of the acreage is actually privately owned in the park with 660 in holdings. So in terms of the soils and the physical palette of the National Seashore, it's ever changing. The clay that you see, the gray clay coming out of the cliffs in Truro is just a great example of the type of soils that we have. Most of the soils are outwash deposits and sand, well drained, but there are clay deposits like the ones in Truro. The other thing about the palette of the National Seashore, the terrain, the physicalness of it, is that it changes, as we all know, living here. So after one storm, that's Ranger Jay, I think he was from the Midwest and he was quite shocked at the fact that things could change so fast. But in one storm, the level of that path went from his hand down to his foot. So this tends to create a lot of excitement for people after a storm and for archaeologists too, because it kind of opens up a new little test pit, if you will, for you. Other stuff gets uncovered too. I'm constantly asked about various natural phenomenon, which is a little out of my league, but we do know that the peat deposits in Coast Guard Beach in Eastham, for example, as the shoreline is eroding into the rest of the arm of the Cape, it leaves behind what was a marsh bottom or a pond bottom, and the bottom was made up of these layers and layers of vegetation. So it's not really an archaeological site, but it is an interesting feature that shows up. You know, the storm of '78 really opened up a lot of archaeological sites that were of interest, and we were getting calls all the time and still do to this day after storms. That's the Adams Dune Shack, by the way, up in, I guess that's Provincetown. I love all of our citizen scientists that are out there. I get calls and emails from them all the time because they find stuff all the time. This is such a dynamic place. And I brace myself, like after this weekend with the storm, maybe some high winds, Monday, I'm going to have a whole bunch of calls and emails, stuff that was found. These are hardworking folks that work up at Race Point Lighthouse. And they found some type of engine part that came out of the sand. So a lot of our archaeology is single items that are kind of pulled from beneath the sand and the soil in one traumatic event. And then this created a lot of stir. There's little marks you can see to the left. And this is in the peat on the beach, Nassau Beach, Orleans. These are horse and cart marks in the peat. So years ago, when the ocean was further out, there was a salt marsh, and you can just imagine maybe horse and cart going through the marsh to collect salt hay to feed livestock or what have you. So we literally have these little like carbon copy things of past activities that you wouldn't normally get in a standard soil type. And this little wreckage at Herring Cove Beach, I'm telling you, it has created so much interest in shipwrecks. It's part of a dock. And what the National Seashore is going to do is we have these little tags. We're going to start a program. And citizens can go out, tell me about a piece of shipwreck like this, or a piece of a dock. And we have these little tags, and we're going to empower people to write with Sharpie, date, time, where the thing was found. It's going to be affixed to these little shipwreck pieces. And then as they get jumbled around over the years, we're going to know how they move and where they move. So that program isn't up and running yet, but it's coming. And everyone's excited to do that, including me. You know, the surface of Cape Cod was messed up a lot, messed up if you're an archaeologist. So one of the most extreme examples is South Wellfleet, where the military used the bluffs near Marconi Beach, and they literally bulldozed everything flat, soil gone, vegetation gone, to practice anti-aircraft artillery maneuvers. The Marconi Site, which was the big 4 towers, there's so much we could talk about and gets totally sidetracked here, but it's an archaeological site now, and 2 of those towers are now on the beach, the bases of those towers, because half the site is now on the beach or underwater. And we can really only access these things at super low tides. But that is the base cribbing for the 225-foot towers. You know, I really struggled with how to present this program. There's so much archaeology to talk about. Showing pictures of test pits isn't really my thing. Showing pictures of archaeologists bent over looking at a test pit, that's not really my thing either. So what I'm going to try to do is just kind of quickly outline for you the highlights of what has been found at the National Seashore and who were the main players. So Ross Moffat, he was an amateur archaeologist who worked on Cape Cod throughout the early 20th century. And he was the one, and that's some of his art, he was an artist as well. He was the one who really was the first person to professionally track and test for known archaeological sites, like the Rose site in Truro. He was very involved with sites at High Head and Truro. There's a lot of sites there. And then he was really hired as a consultant by the new National Seashore. And in 1962, Ross Moffat provided the park with a report on everything that was known about the archaeology sites at the National Seashore. There's copies of that report available, and he really got us a good start back in the 60s. Just as a side note, total trivia, Holyoke is my hometown, Western Massachusetts. There are murals of Ross Moffat in the Holyoke Library that I used to admire as a kid. I didn't know who Ross Moffat was, but they were really nice murals showing the founding of my town. And here I am tonight, 50 years later almost, and talking about Ross Moffat. Wow. So we're going to go chronologically. One of the first sites that was uncovered, it wasn't in the National Seashore, but the National Park Service was given the artifacts from the Coburn site in East Orleans. This was a site that was tremendous. It was a site in which a house was being built, and all of a sudden, 330 beautiful artifacts were uncovered during construction. And an archaeologist by the name of Kremp went out to the site, and they recovered as much as they could, taking the artifacts with them and recording as quickly as they could. This turns out to be, I wrote down the official name. It was a burial complex, secondary burials of the stone bowl makers. There were 329 artifacts that were subsequently donated to the Cape Cod National Seashore. We have all 329 of these beautiful artifacts. These are the best artifacts that we have at the park. They don't come from within the park. And I think what we're going to do, we've showed these artifacts to the Wampanoag, the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. And when they have storage capability, these objects likely belong really with the Mashpees, as this is a burial complex. Not really funerary objects, but they were mixed in with ochre and other signs of being buried as part of a burial. Next, chronologically, after 1961 comes the Great Island Tavern site. Great Island Tavern site, 1690 to 1740. So this was a tavern for the wild people doing inshore whaling in Wellfleet. And there is a small panel before you leave tonight, there's a little information about what the tavern probably looked like. That in the picture on the left is the whale vertebrae that was recovered with chop marks on it. So clearly, whalers would go to hang out in the tavern, they'd eat there, they'd stay there while they were inshore whaling on break. And we have 80,000 artifacts from this one tavern site. Lots of glass bottles, pipe stems, even part of a skeleton. So it was wild times. There's some great articles about the Great Island Tavern site. On the right is an interesting little moment in history where the advisory commission members of the National Seashore went out in 1969, very well dressed. And I don't know, it's a long walk to get out there, but maybe they had a boat ride part of the way. They're out there checking it out because this was the first real archaeological excavation conducted by the National Seashore, and it was through the Plymouth Plantation staff and James Dietz and others. So we have all the artifacts today, and we still have researchers who dive into the collection that we have. One researcher in particular is into the pipe stems and dating the site, trying to refine the dates of the site. We're back to shipwrecks again. So the most famous shipwreck, well, second most famous shipwreck, National Seashore, is the HMS Somerset. That was a British warship that terrorized Provincetown. It was the warship mentioned in the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere poem. Somerset, I can't quote it, but it's in the famous poem. It sank in 1778 in a storm and was broken apart by the waves. The British sailors were marched off to Boston as prisoners of war. And then the ship disappeared until 1883, glimpsed a little bit, disappeared again until 1973. And that is when it reemerged. And the National Park Service did something that I'm still kind of have mixed emotions about. We took chainsaws and we removed as many timbers as we could. Struggle with that, but the timbers are in storage. They are absolutely one of the most amazing cultural items, I think, at the National Seashore. And the public doesn't see them, they're in storage, but they are mammoth. These are just huge. 2,000 trees were used to make this ship. And then it poked its head again in 2010. We scrambled around to get some LiDAR done on maybe what was under the sand and what was left. But I told them that a lot had already been taken. But we have some more documentation because the technology between the chainsaw approach and the LiDAR approach was startling. Remember, we talked about the evolution of archaeology. And so really the mother of all archaeology investigations was between 1979 and 1984. This was done by the National Park Service, and up and down the coast where the National Seashore lands were, there was a whole bunch of testing going on. So much so I had to write this down because I would never remember it. But over 1,000 acres were field tested, 214 sample units, and 200 archaeological sites were discovered. Led by Frank McManamon, who later became the chief archaeologist for the National Park Service, and we still correspond with him. He's out, I believe, in Arizona now. But basically the hot spots that they discovered were clearly, let's see if I can do the little, yeah, I don't know if you can see this, but the hot spot of High Head and North Truro, a lot of archaeological sites there, Native American. Some hot spots in the middle and the hollows, and then Fort Hill was the area, that and High Head and North Truro were areas that were most densely populated with archaeological sites. And that makes sense. Frank McManamon knew he couldn't test the whole national seashore. The superintendent was like, I need to know where stuff is because we're at the beginning or in the middle ages of the park. We're building parking lots and beach access points and visitor centers. You need to give me a map of where to stay away from. So the area around High Head, just as you come down the hill towards Provincetown, and then down at Nauset Marsh, Fort Hill, those were the most densely packed archaeological sites. Frank McManaman's genius, I think, was that he came up with this formula about where likely you would find sites. And I still use kind of loosely this formula, which is, are you within 100 meters of fresh water? Are you near a salt marsh or an estuary? You are at high likelihood of having archaeological sites. Are you in a well-drained soil, south-facing slope? You're in an area that's probably highly sensitive. So he came up with some formulas that we still use as general rules of thumb as to how sensitive certain sites are. So here's Fort Hill from the air. You're looking way out towards the ocean, and the little tour road coming into Fort Hill is here. And all through Fort Hill and really the whole crescent of Nauset Marsh is extremely rich in archaeological resources, so much so that we have the Nauset Archaeological District National Historic Landmark. For those of you who are familiar with National Register stuff, a National Historic Landmark is the highest designation for significance you can give to something. It is of national significance that the sites around Fort Hill and to the north and the south, especially the sites that are linked with contact period, Samuel Champlain and his descriptions and maps, linking those documents to the archaeological record makes this a contact period National Historic Landmark. It is, so if anyone asks, it is the most significant archaeological site within the National Seashore by far. So the McManamon survey went through and identified, my little red light's dying, that's okay. So it identified salt pond visitors, the salt pond to the left, Coast Guard Beach, all the way down to Fort Hill, all the lands that were ringing that marsh at contact period were densely populated by native peoples. And this is why I brought this. A mild-mannered Bill Burke doesn't get upset very often. However, I'm holding a large trowel, that's big, and a screen. And this was taken from a looter who was working one of these sites on the crescent of Nauset Marsh for weeks before we discovered what was going on. But we recovered all the artifacts that were taken, this beautiful trowel, and the tray. When you want to work fast, that's what you choose. But it's upsetting. And you know, that first focus point that in my job is to protect archaeological sites. We were able to get the artifacts back, but for all of you, I'm sure, are aware, artifacts are great, but it's really where they're found, how they're found, and what level they're found, in which a lot of that information lies, and that was all lost because of that. So while Frank McManamon and his team every summer is going out and doing field schools covering 1,000 acres of the National Seashore, this other site pops up, the Indian Neck Ossuary. The ossuary was a burial feature that was composed of a thick layer of unburned and disarticulated human skeletal material containing the remains of 56 individuals. So this was outside the boundary of the park. There was a septic system being dug on Indian Neck and Wellfleet Bayside. And so the archaeologists from the team, the McManamon team, rush out and they document and remove all the remains. So there was a skeletal material towards the top Beneath this bone layer was another layer of human bone that had been burned intensely as part of a cremation. And although at quick glance, the burial appeared to be jumbled and disorganized mass of bone, there was evidence of internal organization. The examination of the bones took several years and revealed that the population represented had been a remarkably healthy one. There was little evidence of disease-related pathology and no unusual incident of trauma. Contrary to initial popular speculation that mass burial might have resulted from evidence of a catastrophic event, the burial feature represents the mortuary practice or a particular group in which all or most of those who died within a period of time were buried together ceremonially. Meaning that not everyone died at the same time. And this was a gradual burial over a short period of time of people who were dying. An amazing, amazing report, amazing story. Other reports that come a little later here, UMass Amherst archaeologists did an historicultural land use study. This was looking at historic period archaeology post 1620, and where in each town were we likely to find historic period archaeology, salt works, any signs of industrial activity. To the right is something that it's really been overlooked lately. This is a Eric Johnson report, which is an overview and assessment of all the National Seashore sites. It's a little outdated and we've got funding to create another one. And what we hope to do is for the casual historian like myself working at the National Seashore, I'm going to get an updated overview and assessment of all the archaeology that's been done at the National Seashore. And then the next traumatic event was the Carns Site in Eastham. So at Coast Guard Beach, suddenly after a storm, like we were talking about, a local construction person, Dan Carns, was walking the beach. And, you know, people who work construction and dig holes for a living, they're really good at finding archaeology sites. They may not have all the degrees and stuff, but they understand changes in coloration and features. So Dan sees this spire crack rock ring coming out with stone tools and some ceramic, native ceramic. And so there's a race against time, and the site is quickly excavated by the National Park Service over a period of two seasons. And literally, we're building this berm to keep the ocean from coming in during a lot of this dig. And in the foreground is Frederica Demick, park archaeologist that served us for so long. She was involved with the Carns Site. Most recently, 30 years, we're 30 years removed from this, right? Yeah, 30 years. In their hurry, a backhoe is used to dig perfectly square, perfectly formed rectangles, test pits. And last summer, as the beach continues to keep eroding, those perfect rectangles from the Carns Site dig, which were dug away in the back of the site, were uncovered. Very cool. We've, you know, a lot of shipwrecks. So 3,000 shipwrecks. Most of the shipwreck pieces out there are from unknown origin, but schooners and trade was intense. We've had pieces of shipwreck come up on various beaches that are bigger and more impressive. And we've had people like David Robinson, who's now with the Underwater, Massachusetts Board of Underwater Archaeology Resources. That was when he was at UConn, I believe, Avery Point, and he helped us document the little schooner wreck. And then there's the Witta pirate ship. This wreck was found within the boundary of Cape Cod National Seashore, off of roughly where Marconi Site is in Wellfleet. But the state has jurisdiction on the submerged lands off of Wellfleet. So the state and the Barry Clifford and the recovery team work together for permitting. And there's a great museum in Yarmouth to talk about the Witta. I have only tangential connection with this whole shipwreck because it's state jurisdiction, but I've gotten to know Barry and his son, and what they've done there, in my opinion, is just tremendous. Shipwreck salvage is highly emotional topic with archaeologists. So we're not going to dive into that and who does it right and who's hiding what, but needed to be said that the Widow pirate ship, this outstanding resource, has been partially recovered. Herring River Estuary, another interesting hot topic in the National Seashore. This whole 1,500-acre estuary, which is outlined in the pink, was diked off in 1907. We are hoping to restore the estuary to full flow pre-1907, but in the process, we have all of these philosophical questions. What kind of archaeological sites are going to be reflooded? What have already been exposed that we don't even know about? So when you restore a wetland and a whole bunch of salt waters are going to come into it, there's archaeological concerns, and we've had to address those as the project goes forward. That one gives me a little bit of an ice cream headache, I will admit. And then we talked about how the National Park Service tries to protect archaeological resources. So here's a historic dike, the Mary Chase Dike, which is in Eastham, just south of Fort Hill. And this is where natural resource restoration goals sort of kind of conflict sometimes with preservation of archaeological resources. The natural resource people wanted to open up the dike more because the dike, which dated to a period in which there were salt works there, that dike is kind of a detriment to the health of the salt marsh upstream, up tide. So the proposal was all the rocks with the dots were going to be removed. And so we documented the dike. It's an historic thing. And then those rocks were removed as part of the natural restoration of that system. We also, when we're doing septic systems, like at the Weilinger House, this was a kind of a high-tech system. It was next to a pond, but again, we did archaeology to clear that project. And then someone handed in, not the beautiful pistol that you see, but it handed in, well, actually it was semi-confiscated from a visitor up at Race Point. Basically the wood part of a 1759 British naval pistol. And so we have that in storage. It's in water to help keep it alive for now. But this was probably, I'm guessing, a pistol that may have come off the Somerset, because British warships kept pistols in storage, locked up, so that the sailors couldn't mess with them unless there was a battle. And I think when the Somerset went down, had hundreds of pistols, and this one showed up in someone's backpack coming off the beach at Race Point. So long story, but we do have that one. Freshbrook Village in South Wellfleet, beautiful cellar holes that are preserved. But we've got trouble there. We've got some looting happening at Freshbrook Village. The looters, I'm finding, the people are looking a lot of times for bottles, especially near cellar holes. Although they dig in the cellar hole, which usually isn't the best, most richest place to find stuff. So we've had some problems with looting of cellar hole sites. Cellar holes are simply just depressions in the ground where there was probably a small foundation for houses. And then I need to wrap this up because we're running at the end here. Great Island in Wellfleet is also an extremely rich area for archaeology. I was part of a total walkover of Great Island and the beach and the island south of there to really once and for all know what was out there. We also recently acquired the Baker Biddle property, and some of the artifacts that were found through a study, 11,000 artifacts, mostly Native American artifacts. Turns out that, much like a lot of other old homesteads, that house had been built in 1790, basically on a Native American site. And so there's an interesting mixing of historic period stuff, 18th, 19th century, with the prehistoric, with the Native American settlement. There's a tremendous shell bin there. So we have all the reports on that. And then the shell middens coming out of Great Island. This is facing the harbor side. We were able to get UMass Boston, Fisk Center archaeologists to come out, and they re-looked at the Great Island Tavern site because that shell midden was coming out of the bluff very close to the tavern site. They did some ground penetrating radar. There was a Mashpee Wampanoag tribal member assisting with that project. And essentially what they found in a nutshell was that the tavern site was also built near and around native settlement sites. So there's a tremendous mixing of 1690 tavernware with Native American artifacts. Oh gosh, that's bad. I'm sorry. So the University of Michigan did a study 2 years ago, of the Doane Homestead site. So if you've ever been on our trails, you come across this marker marking the site of where John Doane, one of the earliest European settlers, settled in Eastham. That was a re-examination of that site. And that sideways document says University of Michigan. A lot of people ask, well, how do we tell the public about archaeology? And we do have some exhibits in our visitor center in Eastham about the Carns Site, how it was uncovered, how it was recovered, and then the story of the living culture of Native peoples today and how they have direct lineage to all of the materials from these Native American sites. So again, in the visitor center, we've got, for example, the native ceramic, partially reconstructed, and then we had Ramona Peters from the Mashpee tribe create a new bowl to kind of match the shape and dimension of the ceramics that were found. Well, so that's really the bulk of what I wanted to tell everybody tonight. I leave you with this image of someone poking at an old car that we found in the woods 16, 17 years ago. On the door of the car, it says Town of Quincy. That is, so think about that. Put your historian cap on. How did that end up? Did someone from the town of Quincy, some city employee? I don't know. That's a really good one. But what I'm trying, the point here is that we all have a kinship to the past, and we all want to connect to the past, and we all have our niche, and you'll find things in the strangest places. And in this particular case, I guess it's archaeology. I'm not sure, it's getting in the ground more. So this is just kind of symbolic of the sense of wonder that we all have, especially poking around in the lands of the National Seashore. I leave you with just my contact information, in particular, the website of the National Seashore, which is the bottom there, nps.gov/CACO, because there's links from our website to a number of archaeological studies and reports that I've mentioned tonight. So I invite you to do some further digging into those documents, or if you have specific questions after the program in the coming weeks, feel free to reach out to me. Well, I was supposed to ask for questions midway and I completely forgot that. So let's, we'll go to the live audience first with anyone who might have a comment or question for me, and then we'll go into the Zoom world, and I'm sure you're getting maybe some chat from them. So any questions or comments about anything we've talked about? Yes.
What about the sparrowhawk and other things that you found from the Pilgrim era?
Right, so the Sparrowhawk was one of those vessels coming from England that got hung up on the sandbars in Nassau Beach in New Orleans, I believe. That shipwreck is preserved by Pilgrim Hall in Plymouth, I believe. So it was never, it was found, but it was found and recovered and taken off the beach in the 1800s. So it was long before National Park Service was administering those lands. But that is a one of a kind shipwreck that's was on display on Cape Cod, I believe, several years ago at the Maritime Museum. Other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
And you can also, just to jump in, if you want to come over here and use the microphone, that way the online audience, as well as those in the back of the room can hear you. But you're up close, so you can say that.
And I'll repeat the question too. Go ahead.
You mentioned the Carns Site on a couple of occasions. What do you estimate the age to be of that site?
Okay, so the question is, how old is the Carns Site, the one that was uncovered in 1990? 2100 to 1000 years ago, which is a time period that it's good we have information on, because we have a lot of sites that are from 1000 years to present, but that little time period in there, which I believe is middle woodland period, is a really valuable time frame to have the site. So yeah, 1000 to 2100 before present. Anything from the Zoom world?
We do. We have a couple of questions that have come in through Zoom. You answered one of them already with the reports being available. You said through that link, the NPS.gov.
Right.
Okay. Another question from Zoom is, what was the original date of the Ossuary burial?
The Ossuary date, like how old the Ossuary was, I believe it's 1000 years old.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got a few more from.
Okay.
From Zoom.
We'll do one more on Zoom and then
All right.
go ahead.
What is Massachusetts law about constructing or building on prehistoric and historic archaeological sites? And what can be done when a site is slated for development?
Well, yeah, Massachusetts laws regarding archaeological sites and building new stuff. If it's a burial, everything stops. And that is a very strong law in the state. But if it's just simply private property and you want to redevelop it, if nothing's being found, you're in the clear. If stuff is being found, I don't know the answer affirmatively whether you are legally bound. Maybe Dan or other people know the answer to that.
It's complicated.
It is complicated, but I know that once a burial, human remains are found, that changes everything. But generally speaking, we do get a lot of private. We have the 660 in holdings in the park, and we do get people who ask about archaeology, and it's a voluntary thing. We may send an archaeologist because they asked us to, but for private property, generally speaking, there's no positive requirement to do an archaeological survey before you build your addition or something. Yeah. Anyone else in the live audience? Anyone else on Zoom?
Got a few more on Zoom.
Okay.
Follow up to the Ossuary question. Do you have any information on the ages of people? So how old were they at time of death?
Yeah, for the Ossuary, we do have that information. They were all ages, men, women, and children of various ages. I don't have the exact numbers, but it was a definite mix. The report goes into great detail about the dental condition of the individuals being very good, et cetera, et cetera. But it was all ages. Yeah.
Offhand, do you happen to know the oldest?
The oldest age in the Ossuary, not off my head, no.
Okay, but they can find it in the report.
Well, I don't know if the report's going to have that, but they can contact me and we can get that information.
Thank you. A few more from online, unless anyone in person. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can we view the Coburn artifacts at the visitor center?
So those Coburn artifacts, the ones that I said were the nicest part of our collection that may go eventually to the native tribe, they can be viewed through appointment with me. They're kept in storage. They're not really on display because they are sensitive objects. Yeah.
Someone recalls seeing the Newfoundland Hollow wreck of 2007. Can you comment on the decision-making involved in deciding not to recover and preserve this wreck?
Right. So what do we do with shipwrecks? Remember that mid-sized one that the Yukon professor came out and helped document? This is a common question. National Seashore leaves the shipwreck pieces on the beach, except for that one incident with the HMS Somerset. So I get questions a lot. Why do we do that? And it's a piece of shipwreck. We need to get it off there to protect it. Unless it's spectacular and intact with like the quarterboard with the name of it and it's complete, we are going to leave it for a lot of different reasons. Number one, when you take shipwrecks out of their little world, they immediately start to deteriorate. And unless you either build a tank to keep them wet for a while or impregnate the fibers with this waxy stuff, those timbers are going to deteriorate. And it'd be like saving miscellaneous car parts on the highway from various vehicles. We don't know what their origins are. We don't have the storage capacity. And I think the biggest reason is it took me a while to come to this point. When you visit the National Seashore, you can stumble on real stuff from the past. Unencumbered, not behind a glass wall. It's there for you to discover. You may think you're the only person who's ever seen it, but maybe thousands have seen it, whatever. That's part of the joy of a national park. And unless it's got some intrinsic super value, we leave them and they float with the tides, they go with storms, they get buried in the sand for 20 years, they come back out. And other than people pestering me about them, it's great.
Have you found any Ice Age animal fossils?
Ice Age animal fossils. No. The problem with a lot of the Ice Age, presumably the sites that might exist, a lot of them were probably on the further out. You know, Cape Cod Arm was fatter and further out. And so a lot of where the Paleo Indians were roaming is probably underwater now.
How has rising sea level affected current and future plans for the archaeological sites?
Rising sea level and the effect of archaeology. Yeah, so one of the reasons why we went to Great Island, that shellman coming out of the bluff, was we were losing that shellman. And it was, so we got UMass Boston in there to document it before we lost it. They even took cores of it. They took cores of the shellman and then they put them in plaster and did all these really cool things to them. But the short answer is, if something is threatened, we go out and we document it. If something's almost threatened, we try to be proactive. But we just don't have a bunch of archaeologists sitting around. So it's really got to be the academic research branches of various universities to help us with that. Yes, in the back.
Have you found skeletons from the pirates in the Widow?
There were human remains found in the Widow stuff.
There was rumor of a burial ground or a mountain skeleton somewhere.
Yeah, so the question is about the Widow, and weren't there a bunch of, you know, there's a lot of sailors that died on the Widow. Weren't those bodies pulled ashore and maybe buried somewhere that might be within the National Seashore boundary? There's a lot of speculation about that. It's been in the papers occasionally on and off. We know that there is a few sites that were probably related to the Widow story that were in Freshbrook Village that I mentioned, but there's no positive evidence and we've never found anything direct, no gold buried or anything like that. Many people speculate that as the locals rushed down to the beach, seeing this pirate ship spilling all this silver and gold and everything else, that the locals were grabbing it and heading to the nearest village via the nearest road, which would be Freshbrook Village. But, you know, maybe someday we'll find it, but not right now. Yes.
With regards to freshwater, are there any areas of value with kelp ponds or lakes that you ever focus on those areas?
Right, so doesn't freshwater, like a big kettle pond, mean there's a whole bunch of archaeological sites? And actually, the answer is no. We've been over this a million times because we have a lot of proposals around the ponds. in Wellfleet in particular. There's no super dense, high density sites near freshwater ponds in the National Seashore. But here they're beautiful, pristine, open wells, essentially, with beautiful water. But no, that doesn't correlate with the archaeology record.
One more from Zoom, if you'd like. This is a great question, I think. What paths do you recommend for someone looking to change careers and pursue archaeology through school or volunteering?
Okay, so the question is, how do you change course with your careers and become an archaeologist or get involved? Well, they must not have listened to my first thing about becoming archaeology is not for everyone. No, but all seriousness. I think volunteering is a quick, easy first step for people. So you could do it in your spare time. You could still have your cash flow job, but you could do volunteering on the side and get some field experience. That's really the best way to jump into it, short of, you know, going back to college and getting an anthropology degree and going to field schools. I would start little and see if you really like it first. And I'm sure many of you in the Zoom audience or here has tried their hand at archaeology, helped on a field school. And there's definitely local ones here that you could get involved with. And you could contact the Museum of Natural History here in Brewster, Cape Roderick, or you could contact the Massachusetts Archaeological Society to get a start. I wouldn't drop everything, your day job. But, you know, we all have a limited time on this world, and so you might as well be doing something you want to do. So I would start by volunteering and getting hooked up with the right people. Okay, are we good? All right, thank you so much.